Annual holiday meeting. Thank you for joining us, and for those of you on the live stream, thanks for tuning in. I'm Lindsay. I'm the Director of Communications.
I'm Lisa. I'm the Program Director. But welcome, all of you. This is probably our largest holiday meeting yet, so thank you very much. And we have several people here who are attending for the very first time. So I'm going to give a brief history of LACNETS and how it came to be where we are today. So 7 years ago, LACNETS was founded by Giovanna Mbesi, who was our executive director, our founder. She was diagnosed with neuroendocrine tumor 14 years ago, and she found it to be so helpful to connect with other patients that she wanted to give back and pursued an MBA. And then founded LACNETS. It was originally at Cedars, and the monthly patient educational series was the first speaker was Dr. Ed Wolin, who was at the time the co-director of the neuroendocrine tumor program at Cedars. And over these past 7 years, we just passed our 7-year anniversary last month. LACNETS has presented leading experts in this field and had an impact both locally and globally as we started filming back in 2014 so that we can reach many people in your own homes, wherever you're at. We also wanted to acknowledge that this is a heavy time for us as our founder and friend, Giovanna Mbesi, recently passed away last month. And as we all know, living and dying is part of our journeys, some more expected than others, and this certainly came as a surprise and shock for many people. And we want to be able to talk about it freely and openly and acknowledge this is a safe space, and also let you know that we will dedicate time at the January 4th meeting, our next meeting, which will be at Redondo Beach, to remember Giovanna and spend some time there just sharing memories and remembering her. There will be a celebration of life in Los Angeles in February. And we just want to acknowledge that whether we know her personally or not, of course, any passing, it affects all of us. And there's meaning for all of us because of who she is in our life, and also because of who she is as a light and inspiration for many of us, and we will really deeply miss her. I spent Giovanna's last 10 days with her, and she made it very expressly clear that she wanted us to focus on how she lived very richly and fully for 14 years with neuroendocrine cancer. She never allowed this disease to define her or to limit her. And she went on after her diagnosis to help others, as I mentioned, pursuing the MBA and founding LACNETS. She also recorded her piano solo album, Short Stories, and the link is over there, with healing music to help people as she found music to be healing for her as she was recovering from surgery. She wrote the song Give Me Peace, which is streamed on our website, and that was released last year. And she actually heard that song during her final moments. The singer Latrice Lawrence wanted to be here today, but unfortunately at the last minute couldn't join us. And I wanted to point out also her song Hush on the Short Stories album. It can be viewed a slideshow was created by one of our own, David Coppage back here, and he put that song to a slideshow featuring his photos, and that can also be viewed. So as I said, Giovanna really had a full life, and she was a beautiful musician, and many of you may not even realize how accomplished she was. She toured with the likes of Yanni, and she did so much with her life, and one of our friends and our videographer, Rich, made a short video acknowledging Giovanna. I just wanted to say that we all know that meeting and knowing Giovanna made a huge difference in our lives. For many of us, it changed the course of treatment. I know it did for myself after my husband was diagnosed in 2015, and I reluctantly came to LACNETS, not knowing how much I needed the support. And it was much more than just the education and the connections to medical treatment that I received out of it. It was really this place where she created a family. And it's really the connections that make a difference. And it's what's made me want to give back. And I think many of you feel the same about Giovanna. She was an inspiration. She symbolized hope and kindness. And so we're going to play a little slideshow that Rich made. And so you can see who she is, and also that we can just take this time to remember her briefly.
I make different decisions now. I make decisions about how I'm spending my time, and when I think ahead, I think about what are the things that I really want to have be part of my life, and if it's not in that list, then what can I do about it? When I did my CD of music for healing, it was really focused on the neuroendocrine cancer community. I realized how much we all need healing, and that was part of also living with an invisible disease. So I think it gave me access to understanding that here I am with, this cancer in my body, and what's the story of the person next to me? And we all have some pretty dramatic stories. And there's a shared struggle there that brings us together. The response was really great to that first CD, and it was so nice to be able to share this with other neuroendocrine cancer patients. And that meant so much to me to realize that this could really be helpful to other people. So in terms of a mission, I would like to think that what I'm doing is helping others, whether that's through LACNETS or my music, that is something that inspires people.
Listen now, time to stop your worry now. Just hush. Voices still, let the quiet still you now. Just hush. Trust your heart to know you're home at last. Know that love is all. Just hush, just hush, just hush.
This is for all of us.
Thank you.
beautiful video. And I love how it ends with that. This is for all of us. That's what Jill would have said, and that's what she says. She built more than just an educational series. She built more than just a place to learn. She built more than a community. She built a family. And this is what she would want. She would want us to lean on each other and continue on. I've had the opportunity to hear all these stories about Giovanna all the way back to her 80s and meeting all these musician friends of hers, hearing how an amazing musician she was. And at the same time, the legacy she felt she was leaving behind, the things she felt she was most proud of, was LACNETS. And that was really so humbling and amazing. So a couple things, Giovanna really would say, we're here for each other. We're here for you, lean on each other. We have support for you. We have peer mentors that connect. Some people are wearing the badges, so we can always connect you with someone, especially for those of you who are earlier on in the journey. And it's really overwhelming, especially at the beginning. So there's many of us here for you. She would also want you to know about Net Vitals, which is something that Giovanna and I, along with Dr. Dan Lee, created to help those early on in the journey. This is a patient-physician communication tool so that you can go through and learn a little bit more about your disease and help make your appointments with your NET specialists, your second opinions and such, more efficient. And there's also lots more resources and information on our website, the resource page. We have some educational blogs, and all of the videos can be viewed on our YouTube channel. And I want you to know that Lindsay and I aren't going anywhere. We're here for you. And Giovanna knew that this was happening, that she, would eventually need to, she knew her health was deteriorating, and she had a plan. She had a strategic plan in place to make sure LACNETS was sustainable and continued to grow and carry on her legacy. So part of that plan was introducing Ron Hollander, who's here today. He is executive. You may know that he was executive director of NetRF, and he was a past president of INCA. And he was helping to develop, and he is helping to develop a strategic plan, including an expanded board. So if you want to come up and say a few words. You've also met Josh Mailman already, the founder and president of NorCal, and they're both involved in helping LACNETS continue to grow.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. What a beautiful job Lisa did with the video, and Lindsay, and you're in wonderful hands with Lisa and Lindsay. The most wonderful legacy of anybody is what you leave behind, and in Giovanna's case, it's that family that is LACNETS, and I know they're in good hands, you're in good hands. The programs are going to continue, the staff is in place. Giovanna had started to talk to me shortly after that. You saw that big bowl of paella we were cooking together. That was in ENETS in March. And shortly after that, after she had gone back to Germany for treatment, she, as Lisa said, recognized that there was an increasing decline to her health. And she really wanted, it meant so much to her, that LACNETS would continue and thrive way into the future. And so she started to talk to Josh Mailman and myself and some other close friends about how best to start to do that. So we started that process. Unfortunately, we didn't finish that process with Giovanna, but we're very committed to making sure that we involve the community in what's next, making sure that LACNETS isn't only the wonderful programs you've come to know and love, but also is poised for the future to be a sustained and even more valuable source of support and care and caring for the LACNETS community and NET patients everywhere. So I'm humbled that she chose me to help you with this. I'll do my best. I'm sure we'll all work together on that. But again, a wonderful friend to all of us, and a deep loss for our community, but we'll carry it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for your help and for being here today. Ron flew in from Boston to come in. I wanted to introduce to you our speaker for today. We have a very special speaker. Giovanna invited him herself to speak for today's meeting, and she wanted to be here. He is words don't describe how special he is. He's a board-certified interfaith oncology chaplain here at UCLA with the Mann Center for Integrative Oncology. And he leads a monthly circle of reflection. He's also an inspirational speaker who's given TED Talks. Many of them you can find online. And he has this way of addressing heavy topics in an engaging and even entertaining way. And I know that that Giovanna wanted to be here because he's a friend. And thank you for being that friend and being here today. Michael Eselun.
Thank you. And I do want to say a little bit about the Mann Center here as a resource at UCLA, if you're not familiar with it. We are philanthropically funded, but we're embedded in the UCLA system, and we have resources for all cancer patients and their families and loved ones that are being treated at UCLA. But even those who are not being treated at UCLA can take advantage of our support groups. For instance, I have a monthly circle of reflection. We have meditation group. We have art therapy. We have a nutrition and integrative specialist. We have psychiatry. And we have a lot of resources on our website online, so please take advantage of that as a resource. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a deep honor to know that Giovanna had invited me, so it's a very meaningful day for me. The Taoist master, Lao Tzu, taught us that the skilled traveler has no fixed plan and is not intent on arriving. That wisdom is so ancient and so eternal and so profound, we might as well needlepoint it into a sampler. Life is about the journey, not the destination. Everybody knows that, right? Yeah, well, try telling it to a coach passenger lodged into a middle seat on an oversold cross-country flight with a screaming baby in front of him and a little kid kicking the seat from behind. Sit back, relax, it's about the journey. No, right. Knock me out. Wake me when we get there. Then my journey will begin. It's not so different, I find, for those going through cancer treatment. I know I'm supposed to embrace this moment, but this radiation has me feeling so weak, and this chemotherapy has me feeling so bad. Just let me get through this. Then we can talk about the journey, not the destination. The philosopher Alan Watts used the imagery of music and dance to illustrate this point, that it is about the journey, not the destination. If the whole intention of a piece of music, he would say, was to play the final note, then the best musician would simply be the one who plays the fastest. Or if the whole intention of a piece of choreography were to arrive at a particular spot on the stage and hit a pose, well, the best dancer would simply walk across the stage, hit the pose, and call it a day. It's a perfect metaphor, I think. And it's true, isn't it? But I also find it's true that cancer doesn't always play by the same rules. What if focusing on the finish line, that this radiation will be over, that this cycle of chemo will be over, is the only thing that enables me to continue to show up for treatment? Despite all of that wisdom we've needle-pointed into our sampler, that it is about the journey, not the destination, our American culture would have us structure our lives very differently, as if there is some place to go, something to get, something to become. That's why we need to go to a good school and get a good education and get a good job and meet our soulmate and all the rest. But where does that leave us with respect to our wisdom from Lao Tzu that we should not be intent on arriving? Ruth was this wonderfully wise, soulful, older woman with deep roots in her Eastern European Jewish ancestry. She was watching the love of her life, her husband of 60-plus years, slowly slip away over the course of several weeks in the hospital. Michael, she said, I thought I did life the right way. I married the man I loved. We had 3 beautiful children. We gave them wonderful educations. Now they have successful careers and beautiful families of their own. We were always looking forward to our golden years. And now look. To tell you the truth, I'm going to be 83 years old and I'm still waiting for the party to begin. What if there is no place to go, nothing to get, nothing to become? My mom used to say that she believed we don't change much, That who we were as little kids, even as little toddlers, is who we still are today, as heaven help me, senior citizens. It's a little deflating, I must admit, to think that it's fixed for somehow for all time, when I feel like my life is about growing and changing, self-actualization, particularly when the very core of a spiritual belief that's kept me afloat nearly my entire adult life would say that it is indeed about growing into a deeper understanding of our oneness, mutuality, kinship, to use Father Greg Boyle's word, and that the pathway to that mutuality is one of intimacy and vulnerability and connection, and an old-fashioned religious word, communion, stepping out, reaching toward the other. But we don't live in an either-or world, do we? We live in a both-and world. So I suppose there's room for both ideas to be true, just as it may indeed be true that life is about the journey, and it may also be a pilgrimage of sorts. In characterizing each of her 3 kids, my mom would characterize me, among other things, as the explorer. I was a little surprised by that when she shared it with me a number of years ago, because it's not a label with which I ever would have identified. But she reminds me that my idea of fun at age 10 or so on a Sunday afternoon would be to buy an unlimited all-day bus pass on the Long Beach municipal bus lines. Just get on the bus and ride to wherever. Exotic destinations like Artesia or Paramount. I do love to travel, there's no doubt about that. I would spend my last nickel on a trip to some exotic destination, and very nearly have. Still, I'm struck by this paradox between the idea that there's somewhere to go, something to get, something to become, and yet we don't change. Caught in our own caste system, perhaps, by design. Instead of buying into the assumption that it is all about growing and changing, aiming toward some vague fantasy of perfection, maybe it's really just about becoming more of who we are and falling in love with that. Even Dorothy Gale offered us that wisdom 80 years ago in The Wizard of Oz. If I ever go looking for my heart's desire again, I'll never look further than my own backyard, because if it isn't there, I never really lost it to begin with. So what then are we to make of the whole concept of pilgrimage? It's a word that has religious and spiritual connotations, to be sure, but we make pilgrimages for all kinds of reasons. Perhaps to prove something to ourselves or others. I have a 20-year-old patient, Raphael, with a pretty darn aggressive sarcoma, and he recently climbed to the top of Mount Whitney, in part just to prove to himself that he could, that the cancer hadn't completely defeated him. It was also a way, as he saw it, to carry all those in his heart who would never have been able to make that climb, the people he had met along the way. Well, that is most definitely a pilgrimage. We might make a pilgrimage to find something, spiritual awakening or renewal. We might make a pilgrimage to return to something, a childhood home, an ancestral burial ground. For me, I think pilgrimage is ultimately about connecting to something, something within and something without, internal and external pilgrimages. Of course, a pilgrimage needn't necessarily even be intentional. Life has a way of sending us on a journey without so much as asking our permission. Cancer would be such a journey. A spiritual pilgrimage toward essence, if you will, of discovery of who I am if I'm not all those things I thought I was. Who am I if I'm not all those achievements? Who am I if I'm not the athlete anymore? If I'm not the go-get-a mom who never misses a birthday party or a soccer game? If I'm not the clever accountant? Who am I when all of that is stripped away? And what's more, is he or she worthy of love? Is he or she still capable of giving love? Well, that is most indeed a spiritual journey, which I would call an internal pilgrimage. I had so many wonderful conversations with Randy over the last 6 months of his life. He was in his mid-50s, colon cancer. I was still talking with him as I was walking him out of the clinic, and we were still chatting when we were out in the hallway. And up walks this woman making her way to the entrance of the clinic. She's on a walker, gingerly making her way. And Randy says, "Just a minute, Michael." And he goes and he just holds the door for her Big smile on his face. There you go, sweetheart. And he comes back and he says, you see, Michael, the way I see it, that's my job now, to be kind. That's what I do. Now, Randy's professional life is one that had been animated by intense financial pressures and competition, commercial real estate. It had all been refined and distilled down to one who shows kindness. Cancer had robbed him, disempowered him of so much, but it hadn't taken away that career opportunity. Richard had been a brilliant engineering professor, highly regarded. He now has a brain tumor. Michael, I used to be smart. That's who I was. But I'm not smart anymore. I can't find the easiest word to finish a simple sentence. And I've never really been what you call a people person. I've never really had friends to speak of. And that's been okay with me until something like this happens. The sad irony is that through his shared loss and vulnerability, I found Richard utterly likable. I suppose in a classical sense, for any pilgrimage to reveal the full depth and breadth of its meaning, a certain amount of effort is required, diligence, maybe even suffering. Think of walking the Camino de Santiago across northern Spain, or for a Muslim to make Hajj, pilgrimage to Mecca, or simply climbing to the top of a mountain. As anyone can attest who's ever climbed the 4-mile trail up from the Yosemite Valley floor up to Glacier Point, the reward of that view can be most exhilarating and gratifying. But I would ask, does the same view mean the same thing to the tourist who just steps off the air-conditioned bus in the Glacier Point parking lot as it does to the one who so painstakingly walked from the valley floor, step by step by step? As with so many pursuits in life, I imagine our pursuit of spiritual awakening and inspiration can be tripped up by our expectations and assumptions. For instance, oh, Michael, if you ever get a chance to see the sunrise at Machu Picchu, it's absolutely life-changing. Or if you ever get a chance to meditate inside the Great Pyramid, positively transformational. For the 10-year-old boy for whom an adventure was a bus ride to Artesia, such promises leave my tongue wagging. But for the part of me that is wary of promises, implicit in the whole idea of reaching one's goals, I have to return to my own hard-won wisdom that if I knew what I was going to learn before I took this class, I never would have had to take the class. I've been fortunate to have made some of those fabled pilgrimages of the external variety, and I dream of making more. I did finally get to see the sunrise at Machu Picchu, and I did get to meditate inside the Great Pyramid. I've prayed at the Western Wall, and I've stood among the faithful on the banks of the Ganges. And in each instance, the sheer anticipation of spiritual inspiration, maybe even a touch of the mystical, was almost unbearable. And in each instance, I met with a certain disappointment, even stepping away from the moment. Hey, I was supposed to feel this. Where's my electric buzz from the touch of the magic sword? No, the gift and the magic in each journey, and it's always been there, don't get me wrong. But it always came tiptoeing in through the side door while my focus and expectations were elsewhere. In September of 2011, I took a trip by myself to Peru to join a small hiking group hiking through the Sacred Valley, making our way to Machu Picchu. High in the Andes, we came upon this small village where we were scheduled to visit a school. Our guide, Peter, had even brought a couple soccer balls to give to the kids. But when we got to this school, we found it absolutely deserted, not a soul around, and it's mid-morning on a school day. Peter pokes around the village and discovers that one of the matriarchs at village had died. She happened to be the mother of Enrique, who was one of the porters who worked for the same tour company as ours. The whole village had stopped to attend the funeral, kids and everybody. Peter said, so let's go. I was feeling equally excited and fascinated and uncomfortable as hell to intrude on such a personal and sacred event. We walked up this long, dusty dirt road to this burial ground that was a small plot of earth framed by a low stone wall. The entire population of the village was contained within that wall. Peter went up to Enrique to offer his condolences. And Enrique immediately walked over to the three of us standing outside the wall with our hiking poles and our backpacks and our big hats to shield us from the Andean sun. And he invited us inside the wall. That's it right there, just being invited inside the wall. He even introduced us to his beautiful little boy who had just lost his grandmother. In my pitiful Spanish, I asked the boy about his abuela, and he answered me, and then Peter explained it was a customary ritual at such events to pass around a bottle of beer and for everyone to drink from the same bottle. But this being a Christian family, they were passing around a rancid bottle of soda and a dirty, rusty tin cup. And then the cup was offered to me. Uh-oh. I've got days of hiking ahead of me. Machu Picchu, I've been saving for months for this trip. It could all be ruined with this one sip. But how can I say no once I've been invited inside the wall? And so I drank, and I was fine. More than fine. They never explained communion quite like that when I was taking catechism. Several years earlier, October '07, my husband Scott and I took a trip to Egypt. After spending many days on the Upper Nile, seeing all the amazing temples and sites there, we had a couple days in Cairo. One afternoon, our guide Hani Hamza took us on a drive out to Giza to see the pyramids, the Sphinx, and all the wonders there. That day it happened to be crushingly hot. When we got there, Hani offered us the option of climbing inside the Great Pyramid to the king's burial chamber, but he warned us that one has to crouch in a near crawling position up a very steep, tight tunnel. It can be very crowded, hot, claustrophobic. Scott opted out, choosing to wait in the air-conditioned car instead, and I said, there's no way I'm missing this, so I bought a ticket and went inside. Hani did not exaggerate. I assumed the position for the big climb up, hitting my head on the roof of the tunnel every third step, cursing a blue streak. And then I finally reached the chamber, and what a relief just to stand erect after all of that. And then to try to truly grasp where I am in this moment. Hey, I made a cross-section model of this very pyramid in 7th grade social studies. Plywood, flour and water paste. It was brilliant. I got an A, and here I am. And of course, there are other tourists there, behaving, in my view, inappropriately, laughing, talking, carrying on, jumping into the empty stone sarcophagus in the middle of the chamber, posing for a selfie. I was getting righteously annoyed and feeling very spiritually superior, hoping that the crowd might thin out a bit so I might go sit down in the corner and try to meditate. Happily, the crowd did disperse somewhat. I went over the corner, sat down, got myself all situated, closed my eyes, took a few nice deep breaths, and I thought, you know, I think I have to go to the bathroom. Oh, no, I really have to go to the bathroom. Oh, Christ. And I got up, excuse me, pardon me. I made my way to the entrance of the tunnel, and I assumed the posture for the long descent down. And what better posture to try to hold it, mind you. I had this Japanese woman's ass in my face, and I was just praying she could move those little pink tennis shoes a little more quickly. And I'm hanging on, and I think, oh no, that's it. I'm going to crap my pants right here in the Great Pyramid. No, Michael, you can do it. Hold on. And then I see it, the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. And I make my way to the opening, and I ask the guard, where's the toilet? She points hundreds of yards across the hot desert sand. And I take off running like I have never run before. Scott told me later that Hani had looked up from the car and said, look, there goes Michael running. Such a hurry, he's so fast. And I make it to the trailer, and of course there's an attendant there who needs some money to use the toilet and for a few pitiful pieces of toilet paper. And I just happened to have the right Egyptian coin in my pocket, and I made it without a nanosecond to spare. I have never felt gratitude quite like that. It was my own little Egyptian miracle. Talk about a sacred pilgrimage. Well, several years ago, I was invited to speak at the Ventura Center for Spiritual Living, and I got there a little early and was having a lovely conversation with Reverend Bonnie, We were talking about all sorts of things, hospital chaplaincy versus church ministry, and somehow we got on the subject of embarrassing moments, and I told her that story. We had a big belly laugh over that and then decided we needed to focus on the service and who would do what. But not without Bonnie first commenting, "Michael, I so enjoyed our conversation, particularly the mixture of the earthly and the sacred." And my question then, as it is now, is which is which? I've told that story many times, as you might imagine, since we went to Egypt, and it always gets a big belly laugh of recognition because we've all been there, right? Annie Lamott calls laughter carbonated holiness. Is it possible that there's something more sacred in that shared laughter than any wisdom that's going to come to a guy like me meditating inside the Great Pyramid? Could there be a deeper sense of communion in that? Of all the destinations we've gotten to travel, none has elicited more polarized and predictable responses from others than India. In planning the trip, there were those whom I would tell who could share with me my excitement and it would swoon with envy. And then there were those who would comment, and not without a little judgment, "Well, why would you ever want to go there? That's one place I have no desire to see. I hear it's absolutely filthy and that the poverty is overwhelming." One comment that took me aback, I must say, but still reverberates somewhat: "Michael, haven't you had enough life-changing experiences?" I guess not. One day, we had an impossibly long drive from Jaipur to Agra. Nearing lunchtime, our driver, Sonu, a lovely Sikh gentleman with limitless patience and calm, he turned left off the main highway onto this choked side road that soon enough became dirt and then mud, leading into this small little village where there was so much activity, commotion, and noise. Horns honking from motorcycles and tuk-tuks, cows in the street, goats, garbage everywhere, people scrambling about, architecture that looked to be one step above a lean-to. And no matter how rural or impoverished the scene, there were always women draped in the most amazing colors and fabrics. We turned right into this nondescript driveway and were jettisoned into another universe altogether, something evoking the serenity of a French country estate. We got out of the car, walked down this long flagstone path framed by 2 rows of leafy green shade trees. At the end of this path is this lovely, formally designed Indian building in delicious decay, pink. We turned left and continued down another flagstone path framed by another arcade of trees, and at the end of that path was another little pink building that was the restaurant where we were going to be having our lunch. Turns out this is a small hotel and that the whole compound is a sanctuary for birds, migrating fowl. All this serenity is steps away from the kind of squalor one is used to seeing any given evening on the NBC Evening News, behind Richard Engel reporting from some war-torn country or another. And I felt this familiar but uncomfortable awareness that I'm not only an observer of these stark contrasts, I am most definitely a participant. So do I quiet my conscience by reminding myself, at least I'm here pumping a few dollars into the economy, at least I'm here bearing witness? I've spent some time wondering why it is I love this kind of travel so much. Why would I spend so much time to drive down that mud road? The first stop on our itinerary was Mumbai. We landed there, spent a few days. One afternoon, our guide, Parvez, took us on a driving tour of the city, and she drove us through what she described was the wealthiest neighborhood of Mumbai, Malabar Hill. She was quoting astronomical prices for these condos and flats in these sleek towers that were nevertheless sheathed in the grimy film of intractable pollution. But at street level, it looked like any other street in Mumbai. There was decay and garbage, decrepit little shops. Wasn't like it suddenly became Beverly Hills or Newport Beach, all manicured perfection. It's all messy as hell. There's simply no escaping the caste system made manifest. In each subsequent city that we visited, our guide would always ask, "Where else in India have you been?" When we would answer that we started in Mumbai, without exception they would swoon, "Oh, Mumbai, such a beautiful city, isn't it?" Yes, it is, but it is a whole other kind of beauty. It's a beauty that is inclusive of the mess. It's not Paris. I remember in the late 60s, early 70s, one of my favorite attractions at Disneyland was the General Electric Carousel of Progress in Tomorrowland. I remember at the end of the presentation, you went up this long conveyor ramp and it led to this platform where they revealed this dazzling animated model of the city of the future, where they were quick to point out the tunnels under the city for trucks, garbage collection services, so no one would have to look at the mess. And I realized that's it right there. Why I love this kind of travel. It's some of the same exhilaration I find in my work, being immersed in the messiness of life as it is. Uncontrollable, unpredictable, filled with the inevitability of loss. Every month, I facilitate a spiritual reflection group at the Sims Mann Center, and several years ago, the conversation had turned to the phenomenon that some cancer patients face when they simply hit a wall with respect to their treatment. Some, ravaged by chemo and radiation, will find themselves saying, "That's it, no more. I'm cooked, had enough. Time to let the disease take its course." And then their oncologist might say, "But wait, there's this drug trial coming down the pike. Okay, I'm in." As a way of an explanation, Loween, who always brings this quiet, gentle wisdom to the conversation, suggests that no matter how defeated we feel by life, she believes life calls to us. I love that, the simplicity of that, the profundity of that. Life calls to us. Life called to every one of those villagers scrambling in the mud that afternoon. Life called to every one of the 8 or 10 men perilously huddled and perched on the rear bumper of a van, clinging to the luggage rack as they clung to life. There is life force in the mess, and yet we in this culture have almost made a religion of denying the mess, deluding ourselves that life can or should be mess-free. Consider as an illustration the whole design and intention of a community like Irvine. No mess. When I got home from India, there were those who would call and say, "So how was it?" And they would ask in a way that revealed far more of their own preconceptions and assumptions than any genuine curiosity about mine. "Oh, I hear it's quite an assault on the senses and that the poverty's overwhelming. I'm sure it left you feeling so much gratitude for all the blessings we have here, right?" Such sentiments couldn't be farther off the mark for me, that would be my takeaway message, gratitude for my blessings. Gee, that would seem kind of arrogant to me to think that because of some stroke of dumb luck or some benevolent force in the world, I was born into this reality with these advantages and privileges, and those poor folks were not. Gee, I must be God's favorite. Too bad for them. Now, of course, I'm profoundly grateful for all my advantages and privilege, but I was grateful before I went to India. No, I think I invest in this kind of travel to be put into the state of unease with the messiness of life as it is, and I believe there's an element of sacred pilgrimage in that. Alice has been living with a particularly rare lymphoma for maybe 15 years. She's in her 60s, but more recently plagued with this necrotic wound on her leg that simply won't heal, goes right down to the exposed bone, causing her intractable pain. I was with her in the exam room when the nurse came in to clean out the wound and repack it and bandage it in a vain attempt to save her leg. While she screamed in agony, I sat there holding her hand, and I realized in this moment I have a choice to make. Am I going to look down and bear witness to the reality of what she's been living with, or am I going to look away? When we got back from India, my mom said, "How could you stay in such nice hotels when there's so much poverty right outside?" It's a fair question. But Mom, there's poverty just as fierce on so many streets in Los Angeles today. The thing is, we have the room and the space and the opportunity to look away. It can be blinding to contrast the realities of life in India or on so many streets in Los Angeles With the American values we've all been force-fed, that you can be, do, and have anything you want if you're willing to work for it, everything is possible. Such values are also infused into many of the religious traditions in which we've been raised. Ask and it shall be given to you. With God, all things are possible. Or in a New Age sense, I only have to name it and claim it, envision it, and it will be mine. Back home, back to my routine for a few days, I was driving home from work, listening to a podcast, a discussion between Krista Tippett and Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian author of the bestseller, The Alchemist, in which he puts forth his theory that we're here on earth to discover and live out our own personal legend. As he talked, I thought of those 8 or 10 men barreling down some dusty highway in Rajasthan on the rear bumper of a van, and suddenly his idea about your personal legend seemed hopelessly naive, maybe even a little ridiculous. And yet a part of me agrees with him. After all, I'm an American who desires and longs for more. I think most of us want more. We want more life, we want to see more, we want to learn more, we want to understand more, we want to love more, we want to have more. And yet it may also be true in the deepest possible way that there's nowhere to go and nothing to get and nothing to become. T.S. Eliot reminds us the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. And I think, yep, that's true. But don't I need to do the exploring first? There is one destination I haven't talked about, and yet I would venture to say is on the minds of everyone here. Death, the end of all our exploring, as it were. Well, in this lifetime, in this incarnation anyway. Earlier I mentioned Irvine as an example of our desire to design ourselves into a mess-free future. Not long ago, I met a native of Orange County who was around in the 60s when the city was being built, and she told me that the city planners discovered much too late in the game that they had left out a pretty essential ingredient to this new community: a cemetery. In their zeal to design the city of the future, they plumb forgot that people died. Death is one destination for which there isn't a guidebook, no reliable time schedule. No one has come back yet with trip photos to show us what it's like. Sometimes I find our language, our imagination, even our faith can let us down just when we need it most in trying to come to peace with dying. Kate, 63, newly diagnosed with a recurrence of breast cancer, now stage 4. Kate was an artist, a musician. She played cello in a local chamber orchestra. While she had been raised an Episcopalian, she converted to Judaism much later in life, but not for any conventional reason like marriage. She converted because she said, I love the humor in Judaism. And besides, there's no hell. Any articulation about who or what is God, how does prayer work, what happens after we leave, was simply left undefined. She experienced her spirituality in community, playing music in community, praying in community, in synagogue. She didn't pray when she was by herself. She also shared with me that she had been a survivor of childhood sexual assault, an experience that left deep wounds, to be sure, but not the least of which was a crippling fear of death. And the essence of that fear was, what if I just disappear? I asked Kate if she had ever had what we would call a peak spiritual experience, something maybe even approaching the mystical. Oh yes, she said. Playing a big, lush piece of music in a big orchestra like Handel's Messiah. I got to play that once in Cleveland, full chorus, the works. It was positively transcendent to be at the center of the creation of this glorious sound. Kate, you just told me your biggest fear was that you would disappear. And yet your peak spiritual experience is one in which you disappear, if you will, into this larger creation of music. It can't possibly be about you and your cello in that moment, and yet your cello is an inextricable piece of this whole thing. What if dying is like that? What if heaven is like that, surrendering into this larger harmonic reality in which you are an inextricable piece, but you are surrounded by the whole? She breathed into that. She exhaled into that. Sometimes I think we need to engage our imagination for new metaphors, new images to keep us afloat when fear can just grip us by the throat. Or maybe we just need to focus on what's right in front of us, on the everyday, on the mundane. Cliff was in his late 40s, colon cancer, end stage. He was struggling desperately with trying to figure out what comes next. He definitely believed there was something, there's more to the story, but he couldn't say what. He had been loosely raised a Protestant, so he had this vague idea about heaven and hell. But he said, I don't believe in hell, Michael. I think we create our own hell on earth. But heaven, I just can't get my head around it. The only image he had to work with was what he'd been taught in Sunday school, clouds and angels and everybody happy forever. And that sounded kind of boring to him, he said. All that walking around, nothing to do. Well, Cliff, if it's true that we create our own hell on earth, wouldn't it stand to reason that we create our own experience of heaven too? Well, yeah, I guess so. So why should that change when we cross over, when we just move into a different dimension? Why should the creative force of the universe change? What if you continue to just create your experience the way you will? That if you believe you'll experience judgment and condemnation, perhaps you will for a time. Or if you believe you'll experience nothingness, maybe that will be your reality for a time. Or if you believe you'll experience some kind of enlightenment, maybe that will be true too. But what if that veil between our worlds is impossibly thin and it only feels solid because of the limitations of our senses? Wow, it was like the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. And what was left? Room for possibility. Just possibility that the story goes on and he will have what it takes to make the journey and figure it out. Cliff will still be Cliff, finding his way as he goes. Jerry was in his mid-60s. He had lived what appeared to me a charmed life. Good-looking, natural athlete, given a full scholarship to college, launched into this lifelong, lucrative corporate career, healthy kids, marriage, the works, till his mid-60s when he's diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. He also relied deeply on a strong Protestant faith that seemed to echo his favored son status, as it were. Like, the Lord's got my back. He's going to rescue me from this. He's got bigger plans for me, and when that happens, I'll give all the glory to God. I don't know how people do this without faith, Michael. He came to see me regularly, not to discuss the spiritual implications of his diagnosis, but to plan out his new purpose in life. While he was newly retired, he still saw himself as a mover and a shaker. He had gifts to give. How are we going to make that happen? As his disease progressed, he came in one day, he says, the doctor says, I'm not going to get better from this. It was shocking news for him. It's like it didn't even compute when he heard that initial diagnosis. As the disease progressed even further, he was moved to hospice care. But he still clung to this idea that the Lord's got my back. I still think he's going to rescue me from this. I've got more to do. As is often the way of things, reality beat Jerry into submission. And I went to see him the day before he died at home. Michael, this waiting around to die, it's killing me. You know me. I need something to look forward to. I can't stand this. Jerry, all along you've been telling me about your deep Christian faith. The centerpiece of that faith is it gets better. What about heaven? Isn't that something to look forward to? Hell, I don't even know if I believe in that anymore, he said. Maybe the best we can do is simply walk hand in hand with one another into the mystery, keeping our eyes open for a hint here or there, keeping our hearts open for wonder, for grace, for allowance for all of it, for the tears, the sadness, the disappointment, but also gratitude for the joy and the laughter and friendship and vulnerability, and for the mess, all of it, both and. Maybe my mom was right, that we don't change so much from when and where we started. Oh, maybe in a few cosmetic ways, lighting, costumes, scenery, and a plot twist or two, but maybe in the most essential way, not. Might there be a kind of comfort to be found in that, a kind of peace to be found in the idea that everything is not possible, that life and people have limitations, even those closest to us, that perhaps we are caught in a caste system of sorts. I remember 25 years or more or so ago going through some intense psychotherapy, bemoaning to the therapist that I always seemed to be coming back to the same 5 or 6 themes and issues over and over again, never getting anywhere. All she said was, "Aren't you glad there's only 5 or 6? I hold this image of myself as a 7-year-old boy. The age of reason, according to the Catholic tradition in which I was raised, the age at which we can supposedly discern the dualities of life, right from wrong, good from evil. The age at which we participate in the sacrament of Holy Communion. And I wonder, in the deepest possible way, if I am still on that long pilgrimage to the altar, opening myself, preparing myself to be ready at any moment, to step up and step out and receive Holy Communion with life." Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And that was just a beautiful testament, right? I mean, our pilgrimage doesn't end with death, with the grave. It's only just begun. And Giovanna is a perfect example of that. This is her legacy will continue on. And recently in October, we released a blog article about changing the narrative. A lot of times people only hear of NET when someone famous passes away, like Steve Jobs or Aretha Franklin from NET. And we as a community want to change that. So people will hear about the 170,000 people who are living with NET in the US. Not just hear about it when people pass, but all the years, the rich and full years we're living with it. And may that be, like your friend Randy, a time to spread kindness, to those around us, to strangers, to those we know and love. So we're going to say goodbye to those who are joining us on Facebook Live right now and end the live stream, and open up this time for discussion, just private discussion amongst us and open Q&A. And it won't be recorded, so you can feel free to share and ask what you want. Feel free to get up and stretch a little bit if you want. And if anyone has any questions for Michael, bye-bye to all those who have joined us live. And thank you, and hope to see you next time.